Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we dig into sources you send our way, pull out the key bits, and, well, get you up to speed quickly.
Yep, trying to make sense of it all.
So today's mission, it comes from an article you shared. We're looking at Sri Lanka and trying to see if there's a link between two things that, on the surface, seem pretty separate.
Okay, what have we got?
First, the JVP leader, Anura Kumara Dissanayake, that's the People's Liberation Front, he visited New Delhi recently. And second, there was this huge entertainment event in Jaffna. South Indian stars, singers, the works.
Right, Tamana, Haricharan, I saw mention of that.
They'd be
Spectacle.
Exactly. And this article we're looking at from March 14th, it kind of hints there might be some connection, a common thread running through both.
Interesting premise.
Yeah.
A political visit and a celebrity bash.
Yeah. So let's unpack it.
It is fascinating to put them side by side, isn't it? You've got a major political figure, head of a party that's historically been, well, very anti-India.
Very anti-India.
Having these high-level meetings in Delhi. And then, boom, this massive glitzy show in Jaffna, which feels quite different from its usual cultural vibe.
Totally different. So it does make you wonder, like the article suggests, are these just random events happening around the same time? Or is there something more?
Let's start with Anura Kumara's trip then, Delhi.
Okay, so the article mentions he met India's External Affairs Minister, Jaishankar, and other key people there.
Right.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting, like you said, because of the JVP's history. I mean, they've got a long, long track record of opposing Indian influence vocally.
Oh, absolutely. The article really digs into that history, goes way back. Even before their 1971 uprising, their political indoctrination, their classes were heavily focused on fighting what they called Indian expansionism.
Right, and they were apparently quite suspicious of the Tamil population, too, thinking they'd naturally align with India.
Yeah, that distrust was definitely part of the narrative back then.
And that anti-India feeling, it didn't just fade away.
Yeah.
Even when the Sri Lankan government actually asked India for help during that 71 uprising.
The JVP still opposed it.
Exactly. They were against any Indian involvement. But the 87-89 uprising, that was almost all about opposing India, wasn't it?
Pretty much entirely, yeah. The whole trigger was the Indo-Lanka Accord and the arrival of the Indian Peacekeeping Force, the IPKF, in the Tamil areas. That became their main rallying cry.
And their armed wing, the DJV, Deshapremi, Janatha Vimukthi Peramuna,
The Patriotic People's Movement.
they were actively fighting anything they saw as Indian interference. The article gives some pretty stark examples.
It does, like banning Indian goods, imports, sales.
And tragically, killing traders, including Tamil traders, who didn't comply.
Yeah, and that symbolic thing you mentioned earlier.
All the onions. Renaming Bombay onions to Lanka big onions.
It's such a specific visual example of their stance, isn't it? It really drove the point home.
For sure. But here's a strange twist the article points out.
What's that?
Well, despite all this fierce anti-Indian rhetoric and action, apparently the DJV didn't really attack the actual Indian forces stationed up in the Tamil areas.
That is a bit of a paradox. So what does that suggest? Was it more about symbolic opposition in the South? A fight against the idea of Indian influence rather than a direct military clash in the North?
It raises that question, definitely. Something to think about regarding their actual targets and motives.
Yeah. And then after those uprisings ended, the JVP went mainstream politically.
Right. And interestingly, they used that same Indo-Lanka Accord, the thing they fought against, as the legal basis to get the northern and eastern provinces permanently demerged.
Which is another layer of complexity in their relationship with that whole period.
So, okay, given all that history, this really deep-rooted opposition to India, why the sudden shift? Why is Anura Kumara now visiting New Delhi, meeting top officials? What's changed?
Well, the article offers a couple of key reasons. First, and perhaps most obviously, Anura Kumara is seen as a serious contender, maybe even a frontrunner for the upcoming presidential election.
Right, his profile has risen significantly.
And there's a sort of political reality now. To actually win and govern effectively, you probably need at least the nod, the tacit approval from India and, well, the West, too. That's the geopolitical game now.
Makes sense. You can't really isolate yourself anymore, especially with the economic situation.
Precisely. And the second point the article brings up is the shift in the JVP's support base after the Aragalaya protests against the Rajapaksas.
The big economic protests, yeah.
Their support seems to have grown beyond their traditional rural roots. They've gained traction in urban areas among different demographics.
So a broader coalition Potentially.
Potentially. And adding weight to this, there's a poll mentioned from the Institute of Health Policy, IHP. It suggested over half the population thinks Anura Kumara could actually win.
Wow, over 50%. That's significant.
It is. And apparently this poll even got picked up by Indian media like WIO News. So India's definitely paying close attention.
Okay, so the article kind of wraps up this part by suggesting that India, wanting to boost its own influence in Sri Lanka, especially while Sri Lanka is economically vulnerable,
Yeah.
has basically managed to, well, neutralize the JVP's long-held anti-Indian position. That's a pretty bold statement about the power dynamics.
It's a strong assertion, definitely. It suggests a successful diplomatic or strategic move by India, essentially bringing a longtime opponent into a more manageable relationship. It really highlights how fluid these international relations can be.
Okay, so that's the political piece. Now, let's pivot, like you said, to that other event, the big entertainment show in Jaffna.
Right, the one on February 9th, South Indian stars Tamana, Har Elcharan. The article paints it as this huge, glitzy affair that apparently ended a bit chaotically.
Yeah, some chaos mentioned. So what's the significance here, particularly for Jaffna?
Well, the immediate thing the article flags is just how different this was from Jaffna's usual cultural scene. Historically, entertainment there was much more small-scale, local.
Folk dances, temple festival performances, that kind of thing.
Exactly. This massive, commercial, star-driven event is a real departure. And it leads the article to ask, well, why? What was the actual point of staging something this big, this expensive in Jaffna? Was it really necessary?
Good question. And the organizer, this Indra Kumar Padmanathan, who apparently calls himself Ramba's husband.
Right, the actress.
He apparently even admitted that the ticket sales didn't come close to covering the costs, which makes you scratch your head a bit.
Yeah, the finances seem odd. The article quickly shoots down the idea it was just advertising for his private education business there.
Why is that?
It uses this saying, like, selling halwa to Tirunelveli, basically. It's suggesting it would be a ridiculously expensive and ineffective way to advertise higher education in Jaffna. How one local like him would know that?
Okay, so probably not just a simple ad campaign then. The article also mentions Douglas Devananda being concerned.
Yeah, the fisheries minister. His worry was that the chaos at the end could actually scare off potential investment in Jaffna.
Which connects back to those earlier hopes for investment, doesn't it?
Yeah.
After they started the Jaffna-Chennai flights and the ferry service to India.
It does, and the article gives a pretty bleak update on those. The ferry service apparently folded pretty quickly. Lack of passenger.
Oh, really? That didn't last long?
Nope. And the big investments hoped for through the air service. Doesn't seem like they've really shown up either.
So what is the air service being used for then, according to the article?
Well, mostly it seems to be bringing in flowers from Tamil Nadu for temples.
Okay.
And visits from, well, film stars and politicians linked to the BJP. Not exactly the flood of investors, academics, or industrialists they might have hoped for.
That paints a less rosy picture than the initial launch suggested.
Definitely. And then the article layers on these other ongoing issues, like Kerala cannabis smuggling still coming in by sea.
A persistent problem.
And Indian fishermen continuing to, exploit the local marine resources. These are long-standing socioeconomic problems that seem kind of jarring next to this big, glamorous entertainment event.
Yeah, the contrast is stark.
Which all leads the article to ask this pretty pointed final question about it all.
It is.
Who actually benefits from keeping the Tamil people in that region distracted, I guess, with what it calls intoxication and entertainment?
Wow, okay. That's a heavy question. It really pushes you to think about who might gain from that situation.
It's provocative, for sure. It implies potential underlying agendas.
Right. So let's try and tie these threads together now.
Yeah.
Connecting the dots, as it were. The article started out suggesting this possible link between Anura Kumar's Delhi trip and the Jaffna concert. After looking at both, what kind of underlying influences or agendas might the article be hinting at here?
Well, if you step back, you see these two shifts happening around the same time. On one hand, a major political realignment, a historically anti-India party warming up to Delhi.
Driven by election hopes and geopolitical realities, perhaps.
Perhaps. And on the other hand, a cultural shift in a specific, sensitive region away from traditional forms towards this big, imported entertainment spectacle with questionable finances. So the article seems to be implicitly asking, are these totally separate? Or are they somehow connected? Could there be external forces or interests trying to shape things in Sri Lanka, both politically and culturally, for their own reasons.
So maybe trying to soften political opposition in Colombo while also influencing the cultural mood, maybe even distracting people in the North? Is that the kind of connection it might be hinting at?
It encourages you to at least consider that possibility, to look beyond the surface. It prompts that critical thinking about whether these are isolated incidents or part of a bigger picture.
Yeah, it definitely leaves you wondering about the bigger picture.
Mm.
And as always, we have to stress, we're just reporting on the connections and questions raised in the article.
Exactly.
We're not taking sides or saying this is what's happening. It's about understanding the perspective presented in this particular source.
Absolutely. Our aim is just to lay out what the article suggests and let you, the listener, think critically about it.
Okay, so quick recap then. We looked at the JVP's big shift on India, moving from decades of opposition to engagement, likely tied to Anura Kumara's presidential ambitions and, well, needing international support.
The pragmatism of politics, maybe.
Then we looked at that massive, slightly weird entertainment event in Jaffna, questioning why it happened, who paid, who benefited, especially when other economic links seem to be faltering and old problems persist.
Yeah, the contrast there was key.
And finally, we considered the article's core idea. Could these two things, the political shift and the cultural event, somehow be linked? Are there underlying interests influencing both?
What's really useful, I think, is how putting these two seemingly different things next to each other, like the article does, forces you to think about those deeper dynamics, how politics and culture might interact, maybe be influenced by the same external factors.
Absolutely. It's a complex picture, so maybe a final thought for you to mull over.
Go.
Considering these political changes, these cultural shifts in Sri Lanka, and how it's interacting with its neighbors, what might this tell us about the broader patterns, the evolving dynamics across the whole region?
That's a big question. Lots to unpack there.
Definitely something to keep an eye on. We encourage you to keep exploring, keep reading, and form your own views.